Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Design Review Board public meeting of April 26, 2018 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves, and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones at this time. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, on any of the applications to be reviewed today are asked to completely fill out one of the speaker cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. You will be asked to speak by the board when your case is called. Anyone who wishes to be re-noticed about a project in the event of a return for redesign must completely fill out one of the postcards provided by the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive notice of subsequent hearings. Current Design Review Board agendas are available by visiting our website at www.glendaleca.gov. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and Design Review Board appeals is available from staff. In terms of a roll call, Board Member Arzumanian is absent. Board Member Benlian is also absent. Board Member Malikian.
Present.
Board Member Simonian.
Present.
And Chairman Charchian.
Here.
The report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on April 19th, 2018. Next item on the agenda is oral communications. I have no oral communication cards, and I believe none were turned in, which brings us to the regular calendar.
Okay.
And at this point, I would like to turn the meeting over to Chairman Charchian.
Okay. I'd like to call the first matter on calendar, PDR 172-6001, 1237 Linden Avenue. There's one speaker card, Vartan Jangosian. Before he comes up, let's go ahead and get the staff report.
Thank you, Mr.
This
Chair.
project.
So the project before you is to demo the existing one-story single-family residence and to construct a new two-story single-family residence. Will be approximately a little bit under 1,900 square feet with an attached two-car garage, which will be located here. Quickly going into the site, it is a R1 zone property that's approximately 6,300 square feet. It's very narrow. It's about 40 feet wide. It's rectangular shape, relatively flat, and the existing house is deeply set back from the street, which is unlike most properties in the neighborhood. The proposal for the new single-family home will be relatively centrally located on the narrow lot. Driveway will be at the rear, reconfigured to have access to the rear to the new detached garage. The massive scale for the facade, it will avoid the sentimentality as it's going to be broken up with, as the second level is going to be set back 40 feet away, and the first level is going to be set back 25 feet away. Staff acknowledges there's going to be some limited articulation along the east side, as the lot is limited with a very narrow lot, 40 feet wide, and limited areas to expand. So it has limited articulation on the east side, but they do enhance it on this side, on the west. Overall, the materials and finishes support the neo-Mediterranean design of the building. As conditioned, staff recommends approval of this project. I'm just going to quickly go over the conditions that staff's recommending for you. Is that the entire front yard to be entirely re-landscaped. So right now they have some ficus hedges at the front, which they intend to keep. Staff is just recommending that the front yard to be entirely re-landscaped, but very low California-friendly plants to enhance the appearance of the dwelling and increase visibility of the property from the street. The applicant is proposing other drawings to maintain the apron of the curb cut from the driveway. Staff is going to condition that they get rid of this since the access will be from the rear now. The archway or the front entry, as you see from here, staff is recommending that the front archway or porch be redesigned to better complement the neo-Mediterranean design style of the dwelling. And also the number 4 condition is the front walkway should be be narrower to match the scale of the building as well as the lot, and to have more of an opportunity to integrate more landscaping and to be more cohesive with the new front entry of the archway, however they were to redesign it. Number 6 is that the overall design of the dwelling should incorporate consistent window operations that complement the style of the building, and that the elevations be drawn with the sills as depicted in the window sections. The window sections that they're providing is a recessed placement. It seems like they're going to be doing a nail-on configuration. I think it's in the packet, but I'll get the plans up. They do provide a section of the windows. I have the other plans over there. And the last one is 2-piece clay tiles shall be used. They're proposing a 1-piece S-tile. Staff feels a 2-piece would be more complementary to, believe their desired style will be. And actually, I'm skipping number 5, is that prior to plan check submittal, revised drawings to show location of gutters and downspouts. This concludes my presentation. If you have any questions for me, I'm available. Yeah.
Insofar as the hedge is concerned in the front,
Mhm.
there's 2 renderings. I guess one would depict it without the hedge and one is with the hedge. You've asked the applicant to kind of depict that for us. Is that what we're looking at over there?
You know what, we can clarify with him, but I did ask, he said that the applicant intends to keep the hedges even shown on the site plan. I think the reason why they did that is to show rendering what happens behind it, but then they have one
Understood.
from the street.
Okay.
So that, I think that's what they were trying to achieve with the 2 renderings.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And you're saying the window section is in the packet someplace?
Yes.
It's on sheet A4 for. Any other questions for staff? Okay, let's go ahead and hear from the applicant, Vartan Jangosian. Go ahead and open up the public comment portion.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, board members, and planning staff. My name is Barton Jangosian. My address is 1224 East Broadway, Suite 202, Glendale, 91205. And I'm the designer and presenting the project applicant. And pretty much Dennis present the project with all the information. Probably I'm going to answer your question. I have nothing to add. So I'm here to answer you.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes, the windows that you've depicted in the front,
Yes.
they have a divide. I guess you can kind of see it here.
Yes.
And you kind of depicted it that it matches the stone veneer next to it.
I
Was that a
think, yeah.
coincidence, or is that intended to kind of continue that line? Your stone veneer here.
Yeah, I line up with the stone veneer and plus some portion openable and some portion is fixed. Yeah.
I see, and then you've looked into this window to see that you could get that proportion on that side, that.
I can make adjustment.
Okay. And the way you're treating the eaves, the roof eaves, you've boxed them in, and then you put some sort of an ornamental molding or something or another in there as depicted in your sections.
That,
It's a fiberglass decorative molding.
right,
Um,
yeah. Be honestly, the first design when I did, it was the rafters coming out, typical Mediterranean style, but on the other hand, sometimes we're having problem with the fire department because of wood elements. And that's why we decided to go with the molding and little bit owners kind of request was to make a fiberglass molding, but still it's workable. And I think this
not in a fire.
way it's more satisfying the fire department request. Yeah.
But you're not in a fire zone, really. You're not in the R1R zone.
No matter what, no, whatever we have exposed things, it's
Yeah, you
fire
might need to get a
department is
different size.
sensitive on that. And that fiberglass is not going to be with the foam. It's going to be a really nice solid fiberglass with the concrete.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go ahead and close the public comment portion. Unless there are any other speakers. That's it, Mr. Jankos. Who'd like to start?
I'm fine with the project. I think it's okay, as well as the conditions that staff has placed in. So can we, I want to go down the list and just kind of give my comments on that.
Sure.
The entire front yard shall be re-landscaped with variety of low or very low water California. I don't know if that's a questionable item there, because it's their entire
it's-
design is planned around those large hedges. So,
That's an area that I have issue too with,
Right.
because, you know, I think it would take like 30 to 40 years to be able to get the ficus to grow to that height, to that health.
Right.
And it's been a staple in this neighborhood for a very long time. So to ask to tear that out, to put a couple, you know, small,
So,
Uh,
I would change that to a consideration.
yeah, okay.
That the existing driveway apron, that's a condition, I agree with that. That the front archway and porch should be redesigned to a better complement the pneumatic training. So on the redesign, I'm not sure what the alternative design would be. I guess we just leave it up to the designer and staff, so I'm not sure. I mean, I'm okay with it. I mean, it's pretty
clean.
consistent, it's clean. So, I would probably change that to a consideration. That the front walkway leading into the sidewalk in front shall be narrower to match the scale of the dwelling and allow the increase in landscape area. I'm okay with that. That the prior plan to check submittal revised drawing to show that's fine. That the overall design of the dwelling should incorporate consistent window operation. I agree with that. That the two-piece clay tie shall be used. It does have a lower, and I'm not sure if the two-piece clay tile would, it does have the track home kind of a feel right now, and if we put the two-piece tile, it's more of a traditional Spanish. So that, again, it's questionable item, but, you know, I'm okay with it if you guys are okay with it. So that's it.
Mr. Smith?
I concur. Overall, I support the project. I do think that if the applicant wants to keep the hedge, the existing hedge, a good idea, in which case, then we should proceed accordingly with the other conditions as so stated. So, I'm all right with the hedge staying, and so far as the other conditions that you just went over, Mr. Maliki, and I agree with your analysis. I'm okay with the one-piece tiles in this scenario. Besides that, I have no other comments.
Okay, so, and then, this might be a record from a time perspective, but I'm also in agreement. I think 1 is a consideration, 3 is a consideration. 2, you know, I think to provide a little bit of guidance, the rendering shows, especially the rendering without the hedge, shows a pretty reasonably sized walkway. So maybe we make it consistent with that rendering, the width. I don't see that being a big issue.
Yeah, it's a little hard to gauge the dimension on the rendering.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, on the drawings, I think it's like, what, 90? Is it 4 feet? Is that what it is?
It seems to match the drawing more or less, the depicted rendering width of the walkway.
So 4-foot walkway, which is 10% of the front lot size, I think is reasonable, right?
Is that 4 feet, Joe?
It's not dimension, but it could be.
It looks like, if you look at the 9/6 dimension, kind of toward the house side of the walkway, I'm gonna guess that what's shown there is 5 feet or wider.
Okay,
So
well,
it's well over half of 9/6.
Either way, I think that it's not a major issue for me.
So we'll keep that
So-
in consideration.
I would say keep it a consideration, and, work with the applicant to get a nice curb. Now, the curb replacement I agree with. And as far as the roof tiles, let's see, everything else is fine. Number 7, as far as the two-piece versus one-piece, I think that's a consideration. I think I'm okay with the one-piece. I think the two-piece can get really bulky at spots, so I would be okay with the one-piece. So if we can just get a quick review of the conditions and considerations, so we have a clear record, and then we'll go ahead and vote. Take a roll call. Take a motion.
There was a little bit of difference, but I'll presume that Mr. Charchin gave the final distillation, which would be that staff condition 1 becomes a consideration, as does 2 and 3. Staff condition 4 remains a condition, as do 5 and 6, and 7 becomes a consideration.
Is that correct? Take a motion.
I think he meant 2 remains as a condition, but 3 and 4 become considerations. Because number 2 is the existing driveway apron along Linden shall be removed. Placed with curb.
Yeah, that's a condition.
Just to
Yeah, yeah.
clarify.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, so it was number 4 that I was referring to. The front walkway leading to the sidewalk and the front entry shall be narrower.
Consideration, yes.
Should be a consideration. So 4 becomes a consideration.
I'll make a motion to approve the project with the new conditions and the considerations stated.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
Board Member Malikian?
Yes.
Board Member Slimonian?
Yes.
Mr. Chair Charchian?
Yes.
Motion stands 3-0.
All right, seeing no other matters on the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and close the public portion of the hearing. We are going to have a matter that was previously noticed, PDR 1730064, which was 421 West Kenneth Road, has been continued to a date uncertain and will be renoticed. And the next matter on our calendar is the presentation of the South Glendale Community Plan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are we going to discuss the minutes? Or we're not going to do that?
Yeah, let's take the minutes out of order. And I believe we are in a position to review the minutes for March 1st, or March 1, as we do have,
Yes, we have 2 sets of minutes, one from March 1st, and all board members were present, and a second set of minutes from the special meeting, the special meeting was on March 1st, and the regular meeting was on March 8th, and all of board member Charchian was not present, though, so for the meeting of March 8th.
So then we would have to continue that one.
We would continue the March 8th minutes, yet
And-
you can vote on the March 1st.
And then I believe Mr. Bellion requested to continue one of the, send an email,
Correct.
because he had a question. He requested if we can continue that. I don't know if it's the,
The email that was sent by Board Member Benlian requesting to continue the minutes from March the 12th are actually not on tonight's agenda.
oh, okay,
So-
sorry. Okay.
so can I get a motion to approve the minutes for March 1?
I move.
Second?
I have a motion by Board Member Simonian, a second by Board Member Malikian. Board Member Malikian,
Yes.
Simonian,
Yes.
and Chairman Charchian.
Yes.
Motion passes 3-0. Thank
Okay.
you.
So we're ready to go back on
Yes.
the agenda. All right, so the next matter on the agenda is the presentation of the South Glendale Community Plan. And I believe our presenter is here.
Yeah.
We'll get started. Welcome.
Hello, Chair Charchian and members of the Design Review Board. It's been a long time since I've been before the Design Review Board. My name is Laura Stotler. I'm a principal planner, and I'm here to give you an overview of the South Glendale Community Plan. I know we distributed the plan several weeks ago to you, so you'd have a chance to take a look through it. Perhaps the section that has the most impact on you would be Chapter 4, where we actually go over the neighborhoods. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the entire plan and why we're here, and then Chris is going to give you an overview of Chapter 4. So the purpose of the South Glendale Community Plan is to really create policy and goals for the long-term growth of South Glendale. We have an environmental impact report. We have alternatives that we looked at. We're looking at implementing a variety of programs to the South Glendale Community Plan should it be adopted. Again, Chapter 4 is perhaps the places is the section that you would want to pay the most attention to. And any comment you give us today, we will look at incorporating in the community plan, and we will also bring it to the Planning Commission. The way the law is written on community plans, the Planning Commission actually makes the formal recommendation to City Council, but we definitely want the Planning Commission to have benefit from your input. So back in July and August of 2016, we had 3 study sessions. At that time, the council identified what transit alternative they wanted to study as the project, and then 2 different alternatives which then were incorporated into the environmental impact report. We had scoping meetings in the fall of 2016. We did public outreach in 2016. And based on the information we received, we gave that to our environmental consultant, and we did an EIR. The draft EIR was up for public comment in January of 2016 through March. And right now we're preparing response to those comments. We anticipate a final EIR will be out by the end of May. And so this is where, this is the project that council directed us to study. So we have, it's all transit-based. It's based on a concept of maintain, enhance, and transform. So the areas that are shown in yellow are basically residential areas where we anticipate less than 1% change in growth between now and 2040. That's the horizon time for our plan. We don't think there's going to be a lot of change. We're not proposing changes to residential uses. But what we are looking at is really growth along transportation networks. And for us, we'd be looking at expanding transit opportunities on Central, along Colorado, and Broadway. And we have already changed a lot of the densities already in downtown. We're not looking at making changes to downtown, but what we're really focusing are these corridors. Corridors and also centers. The main one would be Tropico, because the reason we're looking at transit is we were given a grant by Metro that says, how are we going to maximize the use of our Metrolink station? And we said from there, we looked at doing transit-oriented development around the station that would include not only the areas that are currently zoned SFMU, San Fernando mixed use, but also the hospital itself, which is now zoned C3. We know the hospital, there's some mandates that went on the state that hospitals be upgraded throughout the state for seismic safety. We know definitely Glendale Memorial is impacted by that. So we said, okay, we know we're already going to have investment in that area. We know we have Metrolink station. How can we make the best use of the money that we're already putting into transit? And so that's where you see the areas that are in yellow, or not yellow, but the areas that are in kind of an orange color and pink. Where you see along San Fernando Road, I know we've already changed the zoning in the past for San Fernando Road, but we think we're going to see growth along that area. We're looking at less than 20% change, but definitely more than what we would see in the gold, and we're calling that enhance. And really where we're looking at enhanced growth there is mostly our policies. How do we make development, we already think we have the zoning there, but how do we make the development that goes in under that zoning more transit oriented? How do we link our neighborhoods to transit networks? So you'll see a lot of those policies, those linking policies are in Chapter 4. In terms of expanding the lines, we have a lot of growth that we think we're going to see, perhaps a streetcar. That's what we're showing in the green. That would be growth, a streetcar that was completely under control of Glendale. It's a Glendale streetcar. Then we also have other projects that are transit related that are metro projects or regional projects. So we studied a bus rapid transit that would go in along. At this time it was, we weren't sure if it was going to go on Colorado or go in on Broadway. In this case we studied both Broadway and Colorado for the bus rapid transit. It would come down to Central and then north to Glen Oaks and then on out toward the airport in Burbank. And then we're also looking at expansions of perhaps Metrolink along the Metrolink Center, or Metrolink Railroad line. Right now, we know that they're studying high-speed rail, and my understanding is they're maybe looking as much as triple track, high-speed rail, and then 2 local service tracks, which would be commuter service. You would have commuter rail, which is essentially an express rail. You don't have a lot of stops, but if they do expand it, they may be looking at local service, which is more like if you go to New York, they have local trains and express trains. Local trains would have more stops. So we would be looking at perhaps not only having our Metrolink station down here, but expanding it to potentially have one along Colorado, and then maybe one up in the Pelanconi area. Yes.
I'm going to ask a quick question. You mentioned that they're looking at triple rail, is it, so they're going to add potentially add additional lines
That's our understanding.
of rail. Okay.
Yeah.
And the metro symbol that you have, is that more or less Colorado and San Fernando?
Yes, that's what we're looking at. Again, all this is far in the future, but our concern is that we need to just be aware of what's going on and plan for things in the future. If we're aware that they're studying it at the metro, then we need to be cognizant of that, because if it goes in, even though they're not Glendale projects, they absolutely have a potential to impact Glendale and our residents. So if we're going to plan for future growth, we might as well be aware of that, so then we could take advantage of it and make sure that we have land uses that would be compatible, or at least maximize transit, which may be put in at a regional level to benefit local residents. The other issue we're looking at BRT, or is it a rail extension, light rail extension out to the goal line, would be along the 134 freeway. And again, where they're going to put a bus rapid transit or a future rail line expansion, we don't really know, but we understand right now that Metro's interested in studying at least the bus potentially along the freeway, 134 freeway. If that does go in as a bus rapid transit, we would be looking at putting Metrolink stations potentially to serve the hospital, maybe perhaps up here on Brand, and then also on Central or Pacific, somewhere along this line here. So we've studied the potential for the expansion, and again, you'll see where we think this might go, a Metrolink station might go in. We're looking at, all right, perhaps we want to increase our densities, and this might be an area that would spur growth, and that's why you're seeing the pink in those areas. Should transit go in, then we would be looking at changing zoning, not vice versa. We wouldn't change zone until the transit actually goes in. The only other issue I would like to point out to you is that we do have hatched lines here. What that is an affordable housing overlay. So should transit be put in place, then we would be looking at bumping up the densities along one block either way of the transit lines. And this would be high quality transit line expansion. If it goes in, we would be looking at putting high density residential. That would be our 1250. That's our highest residential zone right now.
And what would be the boundaries of that, more or less?
We're roughly looking at either side of our major highways, the Colorado and Broadway and Central, on either side.
So it would be between Broadway and Colorado all the way up to Central?
Right, one block either way on Colorado, and one block north of Broadway at the northern end. The other
over to Glendale Boulevard, I assume?
Yes.
Okay.
And so at this time, we just studied it. We don't know if the bus actually is going to go in or not. We know we're looking at expanding transit. So, and that's definitely the way the state's going. They want us to put more density in. So the more people you have, the more need we would have for other opportunities to move people besides single cars. And then I think that is everything. Oh, the other issue we have up here is Space 134. You may have heard that there's a study out for Space 134. That would be the freeway cap. And again, we don't know the details of that because there's still a studying going on, but we know they're absolutely looking at using that space for some types of uses.
And when you say they, because there's been a lot of theories about that, who is exactly they?
Do you know?
As far as the space park is concerned over the freeway system of the 134,
Yeah.
that was just alluded.
The they is the city of Glendale
Okay.
is looking to propose that. So right now we're doing feasibility studies on, we actually have RFPs in to request feasibility studies on the engineering side of actually putting a cap over the freeway. So that's the stage we're at this point.
Thank you.
So what is a community plan? It is part of the general plan. The goal of a community plan is to implement the elements that we already have in the general plan. It's not to change it. So the only, what I would think of as change is how do we maximize the transit we already have. So you'll see along with, and I'll go in a minute, the other entitlements, but along with the community plan, we also have a minor amendment to our land use element to recognize that we would have community plans. We would also have a minor change to our circulation element also to recognize that we would have some of these other projects going on in the area. The purpose of these amendments is just to make our existing elements consistent with the land use element and consistent with the circulation element. As a related project, we would be going next year to ask for council to do a comprehensive land use element update and also circulation element update. So if you can think of the element, the updates that we're proposing as part of this project are kind of a stopgap, because we know we need to do a comprehensive land use and circulation element update. It's a long time coming. So the other thing that we have as part of a community plan is, again, Chapter 4. We really want to guide how neighborhoods and our commercial districts will look and how they will develop. We already have if you think of the global policy that says that we want to have commercial land uses, we want to have mixed land uses, or we want to have residential, but how do you actually develop that on the ground? And I know it's basically a tool that will help you as well as us explain to the public what we want to see, because there's that middle level of policy that's really missing. It's just, we don't have that document. We don't have anything that really addresses what does each community need to have. And that's really the value of the community plan here. It's the gap between the zoning that deals with lot by lot and the citywide general plan that deals with whole wide areas. Another issue that we have is just that we've had a lot of changing land use patterns. How do we deal with that change? Our community characters clearly changed over the years. What do we want it to be in the future? How do we address what's happened? If you take a look at Chapter 5, there's a lot of discussion about our past projects because that sets the context that we're working with today. And it also identifies a lot of the policies, regional policies, that we need to address when we look at our local development. Things like greenhouse gas reduction, sustainability, affordability. There's a lot of external policies that are coming down onto Glendale. We have to figure out a way to deal with those. And the community plan area, just generally, we're looking at everything south of the 134 freeway, and we do have a finger that kind of goes up. That's part of the DSP, the Downtown Specific Plan. So all of the Downtown Specific Plan is included within the South Glendale Community Plan area, but we're not changing the DSP as part of this project. So again, neighborhood focus, coordinate past efforts, metro grants to study trans-area development. We also have the Safe and Healthy Streets Plan and Draft Pedestrian Plan that are included. Those policies are included in the community plan as well. And again, when we actually come in for actions, we're looking at the community plan adoption, minor amendments to land use and circulation elements. We would be looking at amendments potentially to the local and regional transportation network affecting Glendale, affordable housing overlay, and then we have some minor DSP amendments. We do have 21 lots that are adjacent to the downtown specific plan that are split zones. So that means somebody owns a lot that's in the downtown specific plan area and one outside of it. Most of those areas outside are parking lots. And every time a project has come in for development in the DSP that has a split zone, they've come in one by one, amending the community plan, or the specific plan rather, and amending the zoning. So we're proposing that we just look at those lots where we have the split zone and combine them, take all those 21 lots, put them in the draft in the downtown specific plan, so we don't have to have this series of individual review. Just put them in now and include it in the environmental review that's being performed right now for the South Glendale Community Plan. And then we also have 6 lots that are zone C33. Right now, C33 allows you to have 90 feet in height. These are uses that are right along Wilson. Everything's roughly 50 feet in height, so we're recommending that the zone on 5 of those lots be reduced to C3 Height District 1, which would be 50-foot height limit. One of those lots is actually developed as part of an apartment building, so we're just recommending that the half of a building that's in the apartment don't have that C3, may just make that R1250, so that would be consistent. So that's pretty minor, but that is part of the project as well. And again, this is just another look at what would the project entail in terms of what types of land use we're looking at. You can see the purple is mixed use. So you can see that we're actually looking at putting mixed use along our corridors, just like we showed before. So those directly correspond to the areas that we're looking at as being, think of it pink as transform, or orange, which would be enhance. In terms of Tropico, this is really where the heart of our study has been. What do we do by our transit station? The purple dot is our transit station. So we're looking at TOD, transit-oriented development, and affordable housing. How do we maximize that? Looking at well-designed streets. How do we make sure we have multimodal streets? We're cognizant that Glendale Memorial needs to have room to grow. How do we create linear parks? How do we connect our transit center to different employment in this area? We're also looking at how do we increase our transit-oriented public space and make it look better, make it more inviting. We also know this is a gateway to Glendale, so how do we have a nice gateway to Glendale so people identify when they come here in a positive manner? And then these are all different policies that would grow, but things such as maintaining neighborhood character, walkable streets, economic development, making sure that our streets operate as open space and parks are accommodated, pedestrian safety, infill development, expanded amenities, transit-adjacent housing. We're looking at a lot of streetscape enhancements. You'll see the public improvements that we've ID'd in Chapter 4. That's key to really creating that link between the policies at a general plan level and the actual buildings. It's not zoning. It's something else. It's the development policy that we are lacking. And so that's what we're seeking to put in as part of this community plan.
Can I add something, Laura?
Yeah.
So one thing that's not here is that part of the community plan is also the South Glendale Historic Context, which was approved in 2014, and then the 2018, the recent South Glendale Historic Resource Survey. So through that, we'll be able to identify properties that have been identified as potentially historic, and then use appropriate environmental review tools if projects are proposed for those sites. So it gives a sense of predictability as people are looking for possible development sites throughout South Glendale.
And then we also have, again, Space 134. And so the next slide I'd like to trade with Chris.
Laura, before we move on, most of these studies that was done, was that particularly for kind of a game plan, a roadmap for the city, more of a public works improvements and other elements there, or is it more oriented towards the developers that are going to be kind of directed towards assisting with getting this vision in place? How's that going to be implemented? Because most of these are a bigger picture of what we want to see, and how's this going to come into play?
We're not anticipating that this would replace local guidelines, but we don't have things in our guidelines that talk about necessarily public improvements that would be in the public realm as well as the private realm. So that's really what we're seeking. It's that gap where there's direction to city staff as well as to a developer coming in the door, so they know where the city's looking at going in the future. What really drove it, though, is absolutely public improvements, because there's a realization from Metro that you can put all the effort you want into having a transit-oriented community at a regional level, but unless you have local buy-in and local policies that first mile, last mile, that really get people to a transit stop and really get people out where it's comfortable to walk and to take alternate forms of transportation, you're not going to be successful. And so that's why Metro is giving us these grants to look at improved facilities. And in our case, we needed a plan of how are we going to maximize our use of our transit center. And so that's why it's kind of the answer. The quick answer to your question is really not quick. It's a bit of both. And so I think Chapter 4 is really where Chris put a lot of effort in. How do we take all of our I think of public works projects, our pedestrian plan, our bicycle plan, safe streets plan? How do we make that, how do we combine that with individual development goals that an individual developer may have? I mean, if somebody picks it up, they said, I'm only interested about my lot. Well, how does my lot fit into the greater community? I mean, I think this is that tool that will give us that link.
Thank you.
Okay, as design review board members, Chapter 4 of the South Glendale Plan on places should be the most interesting to you, because this is where we find the vision for the future of South Glendale and the associated design guidelines. Within the boundaries of the community plan area, over 30 different distinct places were identified, and they can be characterized as being either a center where development is concentrated and radiates outward, a corridor or linear type of development such as a transportation corridor, a neighborhood, or a district for a specialized land use such as a cemetery or civic use. These 4 patterns of development are also used to organize the Chapter 4 into sections. Briefly reviewing Section A on centers, the opening pages provide a definition of what a center is and the types of centers. We have 4 in South Glendale, and they're presented in order from highest to lowest density and allowable height. They are the downtown with the most intense development and highest density, followed by the urban center, the town center, and the village center, which is the least dense and has a neighborhood focus and scale. An associated image depicts the sense of scale for each type of center, so you can look at that and you can see the difference between them. And a vicinity map shows their locations and distribution around South Glendale. For every type of center or land use designation, there's a detailed description and visual depiction, such as this for the village center. Here you will find on the left the zoning, the density, and allowable height. There's a definition or description of the land use, a list of features that are characteristic to this particular land use, and there's an illustration with images to convey the sense of appropriate scale and desirable characteristics as well, with bulleted points tied back to those images. Immediately following each of those land use descriptions would be the respective places that it represents. In South Glendale, we have 2 village centers identified, Adams Square and Columbus School. Each place has a layout similar to this. On the left, there's a description of the place as it exists today, and there's an accompanied map that shows you the boundaries of that place, as well as any particular transportation corridors or notable features. On the right is a photo of an existing condition, and there is an illustration using that same vantage point, giving you an image for the future. There's also a brief description of that future image. The design guidelines comprise the last pages of each land use designation description. Recommended improvements specific to each land use, in this case the village center, are outlined first. And then the next design guidelines are the 3 main areas that we review, we use as a focus in design review: site planning, mass and scale, design and detail. The individual bullet points are in order of their importance. And again, an image depicting the guideline is provided in hope that a better interpretation or understanding of the guideline is achieved. And that's a brief overview of how each of the sections is organized. If you read this, Chapter 4 from start to finish, it appears it's very lengthy and it appears redundant But the idea behind it is that you can focus on a particular land use or a particular place, and all the associated information is right there within a few pages, so that you don't have to go from section to section and piece everything together. But we certainly want you to read it,
I have
start to
read it, and
finish.
I have several questions. So, so one of my the big overall question that I have is, I understand that we want to give some direction and some idea as far as what the city is envisioning as far as the development is concerned. But it seems like we're getting into very specific details and specific material callouts and specific orientations and dealing with specific massing and scale and limiting, in some cases limiting the style of the architecture and so forth. Was that the intent, or should I just go into specific questions on the callouts and maybe I could give you examples of what I'm thinking about and what I'm looking at? But I just want to get the big overall picture, and then I'll ask some questions.
Our intention was, if there's something we absolutely want to see in the future, we want to put it in the plan. If it's something that's recommended, then we would want to call it out as recommended. So if you think there's anything here that is too specific, then we would like to know, because we can certainly make it more general.
Then let me go down, if I may. There's a couple of items there. So on page 480-84, under design guidelines, mass and scale, where it says building height and human scale proportions, it says new buildings should reference the scale and massing of an adjacent and nearby buildings. Strategies including matching details, proportions, and prevalent window, storefront, balcony, and cornice heights of adjacent buildings, matching the height of the existing structure, or when necessary, exceeding the height by no more than 1 story. Well, in this case, what if there are no buildings? What if it's just an empty lot? What happens then? How do you reference that when you are giving a very specific direction as far as the limitation of the heights?
It's referenced, it actually says nearby buildings.
Right. A new building should be, so I'm just saying, if the new building is going a vacant lot that is, there's no references adjacent to it, or there's no buildings next to it, what happens then? This is assuming that it's going in an infill of a site, and assuming that there are references adjacent. So that's why I'm kind of questioning if we're structuring these recommendations based on assumption of it's going to go into an infill of a site. What happens when it's a blank site, or a site doesn't have enough references adjacent to be able to dictate the massing and the scale of the building?
Well, I think you know that when we look at projects, we look at neighborhood context. And I think that that's what this is addressing. We try to look at, the predominant building pattern. There's frequently something that, you'll frequently see a building that seems out of sorts with the neighborhood. We try to avoid doing that. And I think this is setting up relatively loose guidelines to address that. We want to try to fit into the context. I don't think it's saying anything more specific than that.
Okay, let's go to the next page. Number F, finished materials to reduce mass, varied finished materials to reduce mass, and there's a very specific call-out, use of module materials such as brick to help break up building mass or making building appear as though it's made up of multiple buildings. Again, we're calling out a specific material or style, and to me, when I'm reading this, and if I want to get started with the design context, and I'm looking at this, I'm afraid people may just take this and say brick is the only material that I need to apply, or module system.
I think you have to step back and look at, again, the overall context. This is talking about a main street,
Right.
and so what it's looking for is that pedestrian-friendly character. So it's looking for that scaling element. It's trying to avoid all the massive, unadorned walls, blank walls. It's looking for that pedestrian-friendly textural quality. I think it says such as brick. It's not saying must be brick. So it's trying to give you a sense of what it should be, what it would like to be.
Okay, for me, how I read this is I see where the design intent is and how we want to address a lot of these areas. But the way I read this is that it's kind of forcing people to kind of think a certain way to address and limiting their creativity of bringing alternative options in front of us.
And
that's what I'm worried about.
And I don't think that's ever the intention of the guidelines. I think there are even statements in here that say that we're looking for creativity. We're not trying to make these limiting. That's not the purpose of them. But there are times when things can run amok, and you need to be able to have something to point to.
Okay.
And this gives you a way to rein things in.
So the next page, if you go to windows and storefronts, you're calling out the ground floor should be lined with commercial storefronts to face the sidewalk with large, clear windows above a solid base clad with the decorative stone, tile, wood, or other appropriate materials. Windows should be comprised of a minimum of 50% of wall area. Floor-to-ceiling glass should be avoided. Again, we're literally, if I take this, that's a recipe for me to start the design exactly the way it's written. And it would, as some designers may question this, creative designers will, they would read this as I'm being limited to a very specific approach to a storefront design. What if, I have a design that, I don't know, the whole front glass, it used to be floor-to-ceiling glass, or it could be half solid and then half opaque, and it's just transparent and all kinds of. What I'm afraid of is that these are again dictating the design that we're going to be seeing.
And I don't think that's the case. I think
Okay.
that again, it's.
So
I know there are times when, a base isn't appropriate, and I think, those times are recognized.
So if as a design review board member, if somebody comes in and follows exactly this, and we say, you know what, it's not appropriate for the design, and they come back and say, well, it's written exactly the way, in this guideline, and we're following this, we are to look at the design as it stands and not follow the guidelines as a rule for us to dictate and review the design.
Well, I think I think again you have to look at the intention of these to look at. It always goes back to context, and a main street. What does a main street want to feel like? It doesn't want to feel like necessarily a brand boulevard or a retail street establishment. In some of the new buildings along Central or Orange, it wants to, all of these are, if you look at all of the guidelines for the different sections and the different places, we always try to gear them towards the fairly typical characteristics of that place. And nothing, and the words in here are should. It doesn't say must. because there are always times when, you know, this is to give people that don't have a clue what a building should necessarily feel like. And again, to give you a way to rein them in. If a design is good and fits, you know, I think we recognize that.
Just to follow up on what Chris was saying, I think when you look at this specifically, when we're talking about Main Street, we're talking about a less intensive use than you would have on some of the other corridors, and and it calls out specifically South Glendale Boulevard or South Glendale Avenue, Verdugo Road, and I think the idea is that we're trying to, in those areas where it's going to be less intensive, we're trying to knit new development into the existing fabric. Scale's not going to be radically different. On some of our other corridors, we're expecting transformative changes. Here, we're expecting probably more streetscape enhancements, building enhancements. So I think your point's well taken about how specific it is, but I think as Chris said, and if you think about our design guidelines, we all recognize as we apply these things that these are guidelines, not rules.
Yeah.
And we like to think that when we see exceptional design, we recognize it and try to encourage it.
Yeah, that's my only concern. I just don't want to limit creativity. I want to see creative projects, and so when I read this, I kind of, it gives me a lot of direction of how it needs to approach, and you know, and there are rebels out there that they would take this aside and they come up with their own design.
Designers don't like guidelines.
Well, that's true. So. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? You guys were pretty much done with the presentation when the questions were asked?
So, insofar as the different zones, if we could kind of go back to the four main zones, Chris, that you started out the presentation. I know we went all the way to page 84, but really going back to the beginning of section 4.
The part on centers, corridors, neighborhoods,
correct.
districts.
So, now that we've gotten a bit of a flavor, let's say, of some of the details, right? So now the big picture is, walk us through the intention of the different zones, downtown, urban center, town center, and village center, and more specifically about some of the design features and guidelines that Mr. Malakian was just referring to. How do they differ from one to another?
Well, for example, the first one, the downtown, that's guided by the downtown specific plan. So, you know, we don't even go into any detail on that. The urban center is thinking about Tropico, you know, and you can see that right now that has 87 to 100 DU per acre, and it's 5 stories or 60 feet. And you can almost look at that, you know, and say it's very close to the town center, but the town center has a lower, oh, this isn't my book. The town center, I think, is 4 stories, 50 feet. You know, and when you read the description, because, you know, I was anticipating a question like this, I thought, well, you know, you could sort of look at these similarly. An urban center might be, have a destination point or a major use that is an attraction.
Such as the station.
Exactly. You know, so those two are relatively close, you know, in character, but, you know, it's a floor. You know, and that can have ramifications on, you know, what the streets look like, on how you handle those buildings to allow light in. You know, but I think, you know, always, you know, our emphasis is trying, you know, how do you handle the height on those? You know, and, you know, the width of buildings when you start to assemble several properties. So I think we try to address so that we always maintain this idea of a pedestrian-friendly street. And I think that's our big emphasis throughout this, is trying to achieve those qualities. Because, too much of that is missing in what we're seeing developed. So we're trying to put an emphasis on that.
And one thing I would add, as far as urban centers go, the transit-oriented development area is where we think we would see a lot of mixed-use development. We know that's where we're seeing our affordable housing projects go in. Almost all of them are mixed-use. So we think that, we anticipate that we'll also have people coming in using the SB 1818 incentives. So while we've identified it as being 60 feet, if someone comes in with an affordable housing project, we know that it's going to be taller. Because the first thing they ask for is they always ask for additional height, additional floors. So there was a conscious thought going in that perhaps SFMU allows too much down there. If it goes in, if we lower the height, essentially take 10 feet off of it, they'll still get that height back for an affordable housing project. We looked at it as, all right, now there's an incentive to put in affordable housing to get a height. So that really matches other projects that have been going in the area. I'm thinking specifically of Camp. So we know that we have projects that are, we know that this isn't exactly what the SFMU is right now, but it's very close. But we're also cognizant of the fact that the way the state's going, they're allowing incentives that are beyond what we zoned for. So that's why we're purposely addressing that in our zoning, knowing that, all right, for affordable housing, we'll actually probably see a taller product.
Well, yeah, thank you for that input. I think what's also important is I think you touched upon it earlier. When we're looking at these urban centers and we're looking at future metro stops, I think when you have a successful integration of a metro stop with the downtown is when you get off the train and you have a pedestrian-friendly kind of a development where you're almost drawn from the station towards down the street. You know, when you're going down the street, there's restaurants, there's shops, there is activity. Activity is very important because it makes you feel safe. And so there is, I think there needs to be general push towards creating that sort of a use. When we start talking about, let's say, as an example, storefronts having 50% solid, I think that steps back from that, because when I think of, restaurants and cafes, I'm thinking storefront, all glass, floor to ceiling, people sitting outside, cafes, and you're working with existing buildings sometimes, so you're very limited about your seating and where you could put it, where you could have your openings, etc. And I think that is a good thing for us to start thinking about and building in here is, and trying to promote it, frankly, of when you get off the station, and that could be some pedestrian-friendly bicycles, etc., that people hop on. It could be the trolley, all those things that we're talking about, but that are then connecting you and taking you down. There's going to be mixed use, as you pointed out, but the main corridors, we should be promoting more of commercial, more restaurants, more seating areas, more parks, more things like that.
I think that's exactly what we're trying to get at, an open space.
We couldn't agree more. So if you look at, if you're looking at the urban center, which would be our TOD area, page 4-15, that's exactly what we talk about. C, eyes on the street, talking about having windows and having street-facing entries and windows that allow building occupants to view the street-level activities. That's exactly what we're looking at. How do we activate it and make it safe? And there's, again, this is your site planning guidelines are going to be different from Main Street to an urban center. Mm-hmm. So that's why we've tried to differentiate that. Chris has done a great job in providing policies that really differentiate between the two types of uses, because they are fundamentally different in how people experience the city. And again, a lot of it is how do we meld that public and private realm. It doesn't do any good to say, oh, we're going to have a walkable neighborhoods and then not have landscaping and adequate sidewalk to really encourage that to happen. So I mean, that's why there's a lot of effort put into this, and I encourage you, and we will still take your comments as long as you have them, that how do we really create policies that really fill that gap between what you see every day. The projects you see are lot by lot, and sometimes they miss that context that really is critical to the character of a neighborhood. So if you take a look through and see if you have more comments, we would love to have them. I know you're kind of on the spot here at a meeting. Sometimes it's hard, but we would be happy to take your comments on them. And we'll provide whatever you give us to the Planning Commission for them to consider.
And I'd like to,
Well, I have a couple comments, but Jay, did you have something?
as you get a chance to look through this document and learn it better, I think some of your questions are telling me and hopefully us just how robust this document is in truly looking at the differences between the different areas. So for example, you mentioned the 50% windows. That requirement is for the Main Street area, these more enhanced, lower intensity areas, and the requirement is minimum of 50%. What we don't want are blank walls at the street, and bring it to 90%, that still meets that. But we do have the thing about having the bulkhead below, because those areas are more traditional. In the TOD area and the urban corridors, we probably would welcome 100% glazed storefront if the design was appropriate. So we're really looking at the fine-grained detail, block to block, neighborhood to neighborhood, and we still may have missed things, and of course there's room to improve the document, but I do think as you study it more, you'll see that.
So I thought it was very comprehensive. The thing that I looked through in each of the neighborhoods was for parking. And I know this is a transit-driven, transit-oriented plan. And, hopefully Metro will have their funding and they'll do their thing, and we'll end up with, high-speed train, and hopefully the high-speed train will have ridership, and hopefully, and there's a lot of hopefuls here. But one thing is very certain, California, especially Southern California, is a car-driven location. It's a car-driven society still, and as much as we would like to work on bike lanes and bike parking and so forth, we can't ignore the fact that we have a parking issue in Glendale, especially in South Glendale. And so I did see that the plan did in certain spots try to address this. For example, encouraging people to go out and get permits so that there's control over spillover. So I'm assuming that we would have in some of the neighborhoods that adjoin these commercial zones, we would have parking enforcement akin to what we have in LA, where the first half of the block there's meters or commercial parking, and then it's restricted to the people that live in that neighborhood, and so forth and so forth. But even that, I think, doesn't go far enough, because if you go that route, you're still going to have people that have multiple vehicles per household and so forth. And so I think it's time, as we revisit the South Glendale community plan, and as we go through this comprehensive process, to revisit our parking rules in general. We need to have some more creative parking solutions, such as automated parking garages. We need to get a little more modern, I think. There are projects that we see here that park 28 vehicles, which is the bare minimum in a space that if you did automated parking, for example, you could get 60 to 70 cars in. And so what about some incentives to make that happen? If you have a commercial building or an apartment complex that is located in a specific area, and they're coming in with an SB 1818 project, and they're going to be at minimum parking requirements, is there a way for the city to incentivize these folks to create the opportunity for another 30 parking spots that can be maybe co-shared to take the burden off the streets?
I see another waiver.
I think we need to think about some of the thoughts about that now. Tandem is an idea. Also, sizing the parking spaces according to the type of vehicles that are more prevalent now versus what the code provides, compact and standard. I mean, there's some other options there too, like subcompact. potentially. And we also need to, I think, think about it from an incentive perspective. Can we create infill parking? Because a lot of what is in this document envisions these beautiful streets with beautiful curbs and friendly turns that are friendly for the pedestrian and traffic calming measures. That these are great, but if you have people parking their cars on those curbs or at the edge of those curbs, as they do in a lot of cities that have beautiful curbs, but then there's no parking there, right? And people violate and park, you defeat the purpose. So I invite there to be some more parking thoughts placed into the study. John Wilson. Anything else? Well, thank you very, very much for presenting. I know this was a laborious project that you've been working on, and the effort is very visible, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I think there's no other matters on calendar, and with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Okay. Adjourn.